Hello, welcome in this video. Today we are going to see how to connect a custom data source to the RebootX application in order to visualize a custom metrics. So as an example here, we have connected Grafana, which is like a monitoring open source solution. I can see my dashboard and I can see when I enter the dashboard, the metrics related to it. So what we're going to do is to connect the same thing, but with our own custom backend. So for that, we are going to use RebootX On-Prem like this. So the program of the session, we are going to see what RebootX On-Prem is, and then we are going to use the Ruby on Rails application. So mainly an open source one, which is GitLab, which is an equivalent of GitHub. So we are going to change the code. So that's why we use GitLab and not some boilerplate, because we wanted to show you how easy it is, even if the application is pretty big. And then we are going to connect in the app. So first, let's step in and see what RebootX On-Prem is. So here is the repository. So you can access it. It's open source. So when I enter it, we can see that it covers multiple use cases. The one we're interested in is this one. So for example, most of us have monitoring solutions, but sometimes you just want to track some simple metrics that are stored in your main database. So mainly, for example, if you have a Ruby on Rails application, and that's why we are making this video to show you how to do it. So let's get started. We are going to clone the repository first. I get it here, and then I just open my terminal and I clone the repository. So when that's done, I enter the directory, and then I just have a look at what the instructions are to get started. So first, we're going to get the dependencies of the Go HTTP server in order to build it to have some fake data when we use the API. So we're going to execute some code. So here we are executing the OpenAPI generator CLI in order to build Go code for the HTTP server so that we don't have to write manually, all the boilerplate based on the spec. So as you can see, it's generating a lot of source files, but we are using only some of them. In any case, the topic of the video is not to talk about this Go HTTP server, it's mostly a detail. So once everything is installed, we are going to execute our Docker Compose, which is made of two services. So the first one is Swagger UI, which is used to browse an OpenAPI spec. And the second one is our Go HTTP server that will be used to request the query, but just in Swagger UI to show you. So here we are building everything. So usually it's pretty fast. So once it's done, we'll be able to browse our spec using Swagger UI. So like I said, again, this Go HTTP server is mostly like a fake integration, but you can also use it to play around with to make, for example, a custom integration of any kind. Okay, so everything has been built. So now we can go here and open a Swagger UI spec. So here we can see the different endpoints that need to be implemented to respect the spec. So we are going to test one of them, which is most interesting for us today. So we are going to try to execute the endpoint. And of course, it tells me that authentication is required. So we are going to grab the API key. So of course, don't store production secrets in GitHub, especially if it's open source repositories. Here, we know that it's safe because it's only used in this application for demo purposes. So when we authenticate here, I can see that I get the response. So that's what we're going to do in our Rails application. It's to create a controller to send this kind of payload so that the RebootX application is able to understand it and display it to the user. So now that we have been doing this, we're going to grab GitLab. So GitLab, as I said, is open source, so we can open their documentation and the repository, and they offer a Docker Compose file in order to start it in a production way locally. So that's what we are going to use today. So here I can reduce this, it won't be used anymore. And I'll open here, I'll make a directory for GitLab. And then I'll create my Docker Compose. So here I'm going to paste their documentation, but we are not going to use it like this because we need to make some adjustments. So for example, it references the enterprise edition of GitLab and no version. So if we execute like this, it won't work. And basically, we want to use the community edition because that's enough for us. So we are going to do this. Then we are going to change this HTTPS to HTTP. Otherwise, it will try to generate an SSL certificate, but since we are working locally, it won't work. And we are going to change the ports in order to avoid using sensitive ports on the host. So we are just going to update them. And finally, we are not going to use any volumes because we are mostly using this for demo purposes, so we don't really care of the data. So we're just going to get rid of these lines. They are not important for us. So now that's done, just have a quick look. It seems good to me. So let's quit this and let's start it. So this will take a little bit time because it builds a lot of things. So GitLab comes with PostgreSQL, Redis, and other elements. So it will take some time. So don't worry if your computer starts making some noise executing it. You'll see the logs here, but for now, I'm just going to pause the stream while it's building. Okay, so depending on your machine, it can be long or not long. So as long as it's not stuck and it doesn't show any errors, just keep it executing. I'm pretty sure it's doing some interesting stuff, but to be honest, I didn't have a look at what it's doing. So just to make sure our service is running, we're just going to CRL the service. So if you recall, we mapped the 80 port of the Docker container to 8080 on the local host. So here we have a response, so we can consider that it's running. And since we are not animals, we are civilized people, we are going to open it in our browser. So if I go here and I open the same address in my browser, so again it's loading. So we can see that it's been loaded in our browser. But we need some credentials to authenticate. So if we go here and we search for root, here we have an instruction saying how to log in. So we're going to use root as a username. And for the password, they give us a command to execute to get the generated password during the setup. So if we run it here, we can see our password over here. We can use it. To log in to GitLab. So we can see here that it's making some requests. So we're pretty sure that it's doing some stuff. And here we can confirm that our GitLab is running and working because we can see the main interface. So now that's done, we are ready to get started writing some code in order to integrate our own spec as a controller. So we are going to reduce this as well because we don't need it for now. And we are going to start entering into the container in order to make some changes. So of course, in real life, don't change code in production like this. That's mainly for demo purposes. Okay, so once we are here, we are going to just install what's required to make some code changes. Because I don't know about you, but I don't want to use VI. So just need to update the packages so I'm able to install a simple editor. Okay, so I'm able to install a simple editor. So for those of you who are crying, sorry about that. But let's be honest, it's a pretty efficient one with no quirks to like edit and write some code in it. Okay, that's done. So next we're going to go to the directory where the code of GitLab is stored in the repository, in the container, sorry. This GitLab Rails. So here, if we list the files, for those of you who are used to Ruby on Rails, we can see that it's a pretty common Ruby on Rails application. Even if there are a lot of files, we can easily recognize the app folder, the config folder, the DB folder, and yeah. So here we are in it, and if we list, for example, the controllers, we can see them respecting like the usual Rails convention with the underscore controller. So what we're going to do here is to introduce a new one. So we are going to create it like this, and we are going to call it RebootX controller. Of course, you can call it, sorry, however you want. And then we are going to write some code in order to like send a response. So first, let's init the controller. Here, it's a pretty usual one. There is nothing specific. We just have to respect the Rails convention. So if we go to the spec, if you remember, we see that we have two main endpoints to implement, the dashboards and the runables. So for now, we'll just skip the post endpoints because they are not important for us. So for example, if I see the dashboard one, I can go to the parameters and I see that there are limit of set and search. So we won't implement them to make these things simple, but of course you can implement all of this. So what we're going to do is to create a controller method for this. And we are going to do the same for the runables. And then we need to see what we want to send as a response. So in the spec, as we can see here, if we clear, we can see the payload here. But if we look at the schema, we see that the spec expects two fields like items, which is an array of dashboard. So which is composed of an ID, metrics, and a name, and a total field, which is an integer, and which corresponds to the number of items in the payload. So you're going to ask, why do we send the total if there is the items, but the total corresponds to the actual total without pagination. So for example, if you have 100 items and you send them 20 by 20, total will be 100 and not 20. So we can see that the response is pretty simple. So we're just going to write a simple one here for the runables because we won't implement them here. So here we just have to init to an array, and as total, we are going to enter 0. And then we're just going to render, to return, sorry, this payload. So in Rails, we usually render JSON, our result. So by default, it will be a 200. So of course, in a real production application, you can have a look at the other controllers of GitLab, but you would use a view or JSON builder or some kind of things. You won't render directly your JSON in the controller, but it's doable and it's completely acceptable. So we're going to do the same here because the response is the same for the two endpoints. So here, et voila. So then for the dashboards, we said that we wanted to send some data. So we are going, so let's say we want to define two dashboards. So here, I'm going to return a more complex object here with the total here and okay. So in the items, we are going to return multiple elements. So let's say the first has an ID of 1 and is named general. So we consider that we'll send like some general stuff in it. And as if you remember, in the dashboard, we need to send an array of metrics, which is composed of an ID, a label, a unit, and a value. So for the metrics here, I'll just introduce a new variable. And then we are going to return a second one, which ID is 2. So as long as your IDs are strings and unique, you can render anything you want. It can be a UID, for example. So here, let's say we are going to call it system. So it will be system metrics for our instance. So, okay, we have our two dashboards. So now we need to define the metrics. So first, the general one. So if we look at the spec, as we said, we need an ID, which is a string, a label, so which is a string defining what it is, a unit. So usually it's pretty short, but it's nullable. It's optional, I mean, and a value, which is optional as well, but is a double. So here, let's say, for example, that we'll return the first metric with ID 1. So it's the same, the ID here is not related to the ID of the dashboard, so it can be unique. It can be the same, it's not a problem. It's just within a collection that you need to respect it. So let's say we want to return the number of users of our GitLab instance. So there is no unit and the value, which is the magic of Ruby on Rails. We can simply do this because we know that there is a user model. You can see in the app/model directory the available models, and you can call count on them. Let's say we want to return another metric, which is the number of projects. So here it's the same. There is no unit, and the value will be project.count. And let's add another one just for fun. The label is number of deployed tokens. There is no unit as well. And the value is deploy token.count. So it seems pretty redundant, but of course, in a real application, I'm pretty sure you have specific use cases in your own application, so you will be able to send whatever metrics you want to send. And of course, you can set the unit. So for example, it can be a percentage or like megabyte per second, as we've seen in the spec, etc. And finally, the system metrics, but I think you get the idea. We'll just send an empty array. So the last thing to do is to return the actual total. So here, it's pretty simple. We just have to return the size of this array, so which is 2. So usually we would have integrated the whole array, it's in its own variable, and we would have used something like, for example, items.count. But here, let's just hard-code it for simplicity. And as below, we need to render the result, which is JSON res. So here our two endpoints are ready. but there are still things that are missing. So for example, we know that by default, GitLab applies a specific authentication check. So for these endpoints, we need to skip it. So for example, we need to skip the main function that is called by GitLab in the upper controller. So in our case, it is application controller. Otherwise, it will require the user to be authenticated, but it's the authentication of the main user that we did here. It's not the authentication that expected by the spec, which is, as we've seen, an authorization header. So that's why we need to skip this authentication to create a custom one. So here we are going to create our custom one, which is before action, and we are going to call it authenticate. So of course now we need to implement this authenticate method. So we are going to do it below. So we are going to define a private section for our controller, and we are going to init our authenticate method. So what do we want to do here? So as we've seen in the spec, the authentication comes from the authorization header. So we need to grab this header from the request. So again, with Rails, it's pretty easy. Everything is pretty straightforward. You have everything in hand in the controller to make what you want to do. So it will be available in the authorization header. Then what do we want to do? We want to check if the value of this header is accepted. So let's just create a flag, and we want to check if this authorization equals, and here is the moment where we define our own authentication API key. So just for the sake of the demo, I'm just going to write a simple word here, which doesn't mean anything. But of course, in a real deployment, you wouldn't put this value here. You would set it in some environment variable, and you would read it like this: API key, for example, or you would store it in a secret manager like on AWS or Vault or something like this. But for the simplicity, we'll just keep it like this. And then in the end, we need to, this will be called before executing the methods above. So what we need to do is to return an error if the user is not providing the correct value. Here we are going to, have you seen in the spec? We haven't seen it, but there is an error object type structure that you need to send, which is composed of a message with a human readable way. So I mean, it's not the Microsoft errors EX069 that no one understands. So here, for example, we just write bad credentials. So here you have the liberty for the message, but for authentication, usually you don't write explicit things, but you make it at least enough explicit so the user can understand if they did something wrong. And of course, we render this only if the authentication value, the authorization header, is not correct. So if we go back on the top, let's read everything again, just to make sure we didn't make any mistake. So we skip the default authentication, we apply our own authentication, we define our dashboard endpoints composed of our custom metrics. Here we return everything, and we do the same for the runables. So of course, for the runables, in our case, it's not really applicable, but in some cases, you can render anything else. And finally, we apply the authentication in our simple way, but again, never store the secret like this. Store it in a safe backend and retrieve it securely. So our controller is ready, so we can leave it. So now what we need to do is to define the routes to this controller. So in Rails, we are going to change the routes file. So here we can see that we have all the routes for the GitLab application. So it's very long. We don't have to go through the whole file, but we just need to define the routes for our two endpoints. So we are going to use the scope here, and I'm going to write this and explain it after what it is. So here we go. So we have defined the scope. So that means that we want our endpoints to be prefixed. So why? So the idea here is, as we did here, is to write a pretty like random value. So it's more obfuscation than security, but at least it makes it harder for anyone to find your endpoints. So for example, a very known prefix is WP admin. So whenever you enter a website, if you enter this in the URL, you know if it's a WordPress or not. So that's why we use this kind of obfuscation, sorry. So of course you can type everything here, but only you know it. So usually avoid this kind of prefixes because it makes them easier to find. So for the demo, we'll just write A, B, C, D, E, F to make it easy. And then we'll define our two routes. So the first one is dashboards, and it's calling the RebootX controller. And the second one is runables, and it's calling the RebootX controller as well. So if your logic is pretty complex, you can of course define the dashboards and the runables in different controllers. But for this demo, it's simple enough to put them in the same controller. So now that our routes have been changed, we can leave as well, and we are going to test. So let's try to query to send a request, sorry, to these endpoints. So as I said, it's ABCDEDF dashboards. And of course, it doesn't work. So why? Because we need for the changes to be applied to restart the Puma server. So of course, don't do that in production again, but here we can do it by simply restarting Puma, which is the server which is running our Rails application. So as we see in the logs on the right, it's restarting everything. So this can take some time as well. And we can see here in the logs that GitLab tells us that it's being restarted. So we just wait for it to restart. Okay, after a few minutes, it has restarted. So if now I send my request, I can see that I have a response, which is bad credentials. So it's good. It means that I reached my controller because I have the same error message, but it's understandable because I didn't provide any authentication. So here, if I send the header as it's required by our controller, if I send, sorry, a bad value, I still have the bad credentials. But if I send the expected value, here I have my answer, my response. So it means that our controller and our routing works. And if we do the same for the runables, it works as well. We have an empty response. So now what we can do is that we can, so since everything is ready, so don't have a look. I mean, we don't care about all the logs that GitLab is spitting. I don't know what it's doing. So here we are sure that our controller works. So what we can do is that we can go back to the RebootX application, and we can try to connect to the server. So here my phone is connected to my Wi-Fi network, which is on the same network as my MacBook. So of course you need to take that into account if you're connecting to a local machine. So here, if I enter the IP address of my MacBook, so again, it's my local address. And I enter the port, which is 8080. Then it asks me if I have the API key. Of course, I have it. And if you remember, it was TOTO, which is Toto. I see that it's loading. And if I go back to my control panel, I can see here the list. So RebootX On-Prem works for cloud and dashboard. So of course, if I open here, it doesn't work. I think there is some mistake somewhere. But if I open here, it doesn't work as well. So I think we made a small mistake. Let's have a look at what we did wrong. So if we try again to execute the query, we have the items and the total. We know that we respected the spec. Okay, so the issue is not in the code. I checked. It's because we didn't enter the correct URL in the applications. We're going to start all over again. So here I enter again my URL, but you'll see that I missed something very important. 0.15 8080. I missed the prefix. So I talked about it a lot, but I forgot to enter it here. So of course I need to enter it here to show to the app what's the prefix. So here it's done. I enter again my API key. So here it's good. And if I open Spence, here we go. I have the same response, sorry, as here. So if I enter again each dashboard, so in general, if you remember, I entered 3 metrics, so I have them here, and in system, I didn't have any. So of course, you have the liberty to enter the dashboards and the metrics that you want. And just to show you, in the runables, of course, we didn't send anything, so it's empty here. So if it's fun for you, you can, of course, send the own Rails server here, and you can try to restart it. So it's kind of inception, but it's fun to learn how it works. So if we go back here, I just opened the general dashboard. I see that I have one user, which is probably the root user I have created by default, but 0. So let's try to go back to GitLab, and we're going to create a project here. So sorry, my computer is kind of dying, so each click on a button takes a pretty long time. So I'm just going to create a blank project. It's just for the demo. I'm going to call it RebootX Rails. Okay, let's call it RebootX Rails 1. And we just use root over here. Okay, so let's create the project. So if I go back to my app and I refresh over here, I see that I have my project. So it means that it works. I didn't lie to you. So even if it's not completely saved on this side, so you got it. It works, and so you have your live data updated, even if you update and refresh when it's not done. So here it is for the demo. So you as a summary, if we go back here, we started the RebootX On-Prem Docker Compose locally to understand how it's done here in the Swagger UI, to understand what is expected from the spec in terms of endpoints and payloads. Then we cloned GitLab and we started it. So hopefully it didn't take too much time to load. After that, we entered the code and we started to edit like the controller. So that's the main advantage of Ruby on Rails, even if some people don't like it. Whenever you enter a Ruby on Rails application, you understand from the start how it works and how you can update it. So here we have created our controller next to the others without touching anything. You see? So our controller is over here, but it's next to all the others. So we didn't have to touch anything uh, except creating a controller and updating the routes. So what could be done differently? So of course, in a real application, you wouldn't change like this. You would add some tests. You would make sure everything works. You would make sure it doesn't break your existing application. And regarding the metrics that you want to send, of course, it can be anything. It depends on your industry, on your project, etc. So, for example, if you're working in e-commerce, uh, it can be like the number of orders during the day, during the week. It can be the number of current customers. Uh, so for GitLab, for example, I took the project, the users, but I'm pretty sure there are many other interesting metrics to track. So for example, the number of commits made today, even if it's not an indicator of a performing team, of course. Uh, so again, this is an example for Rails, but it can be applied to any other technology. So for example, if you're using Next.js, or a framework in Python, for example, in Go, in Rust, you can apply the same recipe. It's just that you have to adapt the code, but as long as uh, you respect the contract here, that you have like an endpoint with a prefix that you provide to the app, and that you implement the good endpoints with the good response, it will work. And you will be able to connect to the RebootX application. And as usual, if you have any question, like, feel free to ask. We'll be happy to help. So thanks for following this. Um Feel free to send us a message. You can do it via the give feedback section on the app here. And of course, if you like the app, if you like what we do, you can rate the app on the store. It will help us rank better in the developer tools, and it will give us more visibility. So again, thanks for watching, and see you soon in the next video. Thanks a lot.